Okay, this is Brother Wolf, and this is HS 285. Today's group, they're going to talk to us about EMTALA. Some people call it EMTALA. I think I've heard it mostly pronounced EMTALA, but either way is fine. And I will turn the time over to that group. Whenever you're ready, feel free to start.
Okay, so EMTALA stands for the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. This act is dealing with, it's making it so that anyone who comes into a hospital has to be treated. They cannot be treated any differently than someone who has insurance or can pay. So whether this person has the ability to pay or insurance, they still have to be treated the same as everybody else. The act itself governs when patients can be refused, which sounds weird because I just said everyone has to be accepted, but I'll explain that in a minute. And then also when they can be transferred from one hospital to another. So how that works is the hospital has to accept everybody, but if they don't have the facilities to adequately treat that person or stabilize them, depending on the condition, they are able to transfer them to another facility, and that facility, under law, is required to accept that transfer patient. The hospitals who need to follow EMTALA are the ones who have agreements or are part of the CMS, so Medicare and Medicaid. So we can go ahead and change slides. Who covers the cost of Medicare? Excuse me, of EMTALA. So this part is still kind of confusing. One thing that we know for sure is that medical staff, the physicians, tend to put forward a lot of charity care and just take care of these patients under EMTALA without actually receiving anything in return. The part that was kind of confusing to us, and maybe you can clear this up for us, Brother Wolf, is how it works now, because everything I've been finding hasn't given a clear answer on who covers the costs now. All it's referenced is that you know, when Obamacare comes into play, everything might change, but currently, meaning before Obamacare, the extra bills were passed on and divvied up between taxpayers and hospitals and then privately insured patients to cover those costs. But then I don't know how it is since Obamacare has come into play, and I haven't been able to find a solid answer on that. So that's how it used to be taken care of. History and timeline.
Sure, I can comment on that a little bit, maybe after.
Okay. So EMTALA was passed as part of the COBRA laws, and we heard about that in some previous presentations. So if you hear COBRA law, there's a lot of laws referred to as COBRA laws because they're all under that act. So just pay attention, and EMTALA might be one of the ones they could be referring to when you hear that. It was passed in 1986, and one of the main reasons it was passed is because of this thing called patient dumping, which is where a hospital would have someone come in with an emergency, and they would end up dumping them. They'd say, no, go somewhere else, and it was usually because they were minorities who didn't have insurance or a way to pay because they were unemployed. And, you know, we thought that was ethically and morally wrong. So they put in this EMTALA, and even along the way of EMTALA, they've had a few bumps and altered a few things. For example, their transferring rules came into play later on because they found that when you transfer patients, they're twice as likely to die. So now they don't allow transferring unless it's for a specific cause, and the patient is unable to be treated in the current facility. And then also, there was an interesting story. In 1989, they used to only, up until then, they used to only accept emergency patients who were brought in by helicopters or ambulance, as well as those who were already in the hospital and then developed an emergency condition. Anyway, but in 1998, in Chicago, there was a 15-year-old boy who was shot on a playground that was near the hospital, and a bunch of his friends tried to bring him to the hospital. Didn't make it all the way. They made it to an alley just outside the hospital, and then ran to the hospital for help. And the people there refused to help him because of rules that they weren't supposed to leave the hospital grounds while they were on duty. And so this young boy ended up dying, and they were fined. However, under EMTALA, they were still acting within the law. So, because in EMTALA there were no specifications on who to accept, and so they ended up fixing this by looking up a definition of a campus, and so now they classify it as a hospital campus. It extends to 250 yards, so there's a new 250-yard rule, and anyone found within that 250-yard campus of a hospital should be treated under EMTALA. We can go to the next slide. As for the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, their role in EMTALA is to kind of keep the hospitals up to date, make sure that they understand how to act in accordance with EMTALA. For example, when the Ebola outbreak occurred, the Department of Health and Welfare sent out a notice to all hospitals saying things like, under EMTALA, it is required that you care for an Ebola patient. We don't care how scary this disease is to you, but you have to treat this patient. And if you do not have facilities to treat this patient, these are the hospitals that are appropriate for you to transfer them to under EMTALA. And things like that. So they kind of just make sure that everything is clear in regards to how to act with EMTALA under certain conditions. The last thing that they can do is investigate a hospital. So if they get complaints that someone is not acting within EMTALA or technically within any other of the statutes they're supposed to be following, they can send their investigation department in to check things out.
Okay, so Caitlin kind of covered in the history and timeline of EMTALA why it was necessary, but basically it comes down to that people were dying in the streets outside of hospitals, literally. In 1985, there were two events that media attention really grabbed onto those and said, hey, look at this, we have a problem, something has to happen. One of them was named Eugene Barnes, and he had been stabbed in the head and sought medical treatment at a hospital. And he went to 3 different hospitals where 4 different neurosurgeons refused to operate on him because of concerns over whether or not he could afford to pay for the surgeries. And then by the time a 5th neurosurgeon agreed to do the surgery, it was too late to save his life, and he died. Sharon Ford, in the same year, was in active labor, and she went to 3 hospitals. The first hospital turned her away flat out, said, no, you can't afford to have your baby here, so go find another hospital. And the second hospital placed a fetal monitor on her and found that the baby had an irregular heartbeat. And so after that, they said, oh, no, you can't have your baby here. So then at a 3rd hospital, she went in, and they performed an emergency C-section, but by then it was too late to save the baby's life also. So, of course, things like this, these are just 2 examples of things that were happening. And so the media grabbed onto that and really brought the word to the forefront. And previous to the law being passed in 1986, several states had tried to pass their own laws against patient dumping. But, of course, regulating that on a state level was difficult for them, and it really helped to have an overall blanket law for all of the states to follow and abide by.
So, continuing on from what Caitlin and Kayleen have already mentioned, as a result, the local and state government began to abdicate responsibility for charity care, so shifting this public responsibility to all hospitals. And EMTALA, therefore, became the effective national health care policy for those who were uninsured. So going with that, enforcing EMTALA, Congress in 2000 made EMTALA enforcement a priority with the penalties more than 1.17 million. And the CMS division of the Department of Health and Human Services is primarily responsible for investigation and partially responsible for enforcement of this statute, and who's also responsible for the enforcement of EMTALA is the Office of Inspector General, the OIG, and we learned about him in the previous presentation. And he's responsible for other enforcement aspects of the law. Violations. So private enforcement of the law is provided by creation of a special civil cause of action against hospitals for violation, and these causes can be based on hospital policies and procedures, actions of employees, and actions of independent physicians on the medical staff of the hospital, and this can be brought to state or federal court. And there is split authority on how state malpractice procedures for the physicians can apply when the physician is sued for malpractice along with the hospital EMTALA claim. And a really interesting fact that I found from this was an estimated 1,700 hospitals or more than 1 in 3 U.S. acute care hospitals have received EMTALA enforcement actions from CMS. So the top states, the top EMTALA states are Florida, Georgia, Texas, and California, and all these states have virtually had significant citation activities. And with the penalties, few hospitals have received actual termination. There is a 2-year statute of limitations for civil enforcement of any violation, and the penalties can include hospital fines up to $50,000 per violation, and if the hospital has fewer than 100 beds, it can be $25,000 for the fine, and termination of the hospital or physician's Medicare provider agreement, as well as the hospital can be sued for personal injury in a civil court under a private cause of action. The physicians can even get fines up to $50,000 per violation, and that includes on-call physicians as well. And a receiving facility, if they've suffered financial loss as a result of another hospital's violation of EMTALA, it can bring a lawsuit to recover those damages. And with that, there's no violation if a patient refuses examination or treatment unless there is evidence of coercion. So with the process in reporting violations, the violations have to be reported to the organizations here. When reporting a violation to the Justice Department, it's for evaluation for the Hill-Burton Act, and what the Hill-Burton Act is basically free and reduced cost health care, which gives hospitals and nursing homes and other health care facilities grants and loans. And when a report's also made to the Office of Civil Rights, is for evaluation of discrimination, and for the Internal Revenue Service, it's for evaluation of implications for tax-exempt status, and the JCAHO, it's for accreditation review. And so all of these agencies are potential enforcers of the law, but only the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the OIG are actively involved with the reporting as well. So just be aware of that. And that's our presentation. I hope you all see a bit more of what EMTALA is and you enjoyed it.
Is Brother Wolf there?
Yeah. There he is.
For a second. So, so can you hear me okay?
Yeah. You're coming through.
Okay, okay, sorry about that. Excellent job. You guys did a really nice job. I'm impressed, too, that you guys came up with that story about the boy in Chicago that you said 1998. Interestingly, did you guys come across the name of that hospital?
If I did, I don't remember it.
Yeah, no, and it's fine. This is trivia. You don't have to know it, but it was Ravenswood Hospital. That was a hospital that I did rotations at when I was in medical school, and so I know the exact spot where that boy was in the alley. And so in the city of, and then you have these little alleyways, and then another building. And you guys were absolutely right. The hospital didn't do anything legally wrong. They weren't allowed to leave, and so unfortunately, even if they had been able to, that community hospital is not really equipped for the went crazy, and it did result in what you stated, these new rules about what comprises a campus, right? 250 yards from the campus. But you theoretically could still run into this problem, right? What if the person is 260 yards from the campus?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So somewhere you have to draw a line where the responsibility ends and begins. And I'm not trying to diminish how sad it was, but
So, Brother Wolf, your microphone keeps cutting out.
what? So if I have an ear infection, I can go to emergency room and say, hey, I don't have insurance, but you have to treat me?
No, it's only things classified as emergency medical conditions. And there's like a list of them under EMTALA, but I don't remember all of them. But like one of them would be a woman in labor. Technically, she should have been admitted. All of these dramatic ones, basically the person who got shot, and I don't remember everything on the list, but they do have a list of things that should be counted as emergency medical, emergencies.
So along with that, though, they do have to do an exam, right? Didn't we talk about that that they have to be evaluated? There it is, first bullet point according to EMTALA. So if you had this ear infection and went to the hospital, they would have to at least through medical screening determine that there wasn't something more serious than just your ear infection.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really for emergencies and for active labor, as you stated correctly. You know, it's more the emergency stabilization, and once the light care of, they don't have to treat. So that was good. So if you guys would be so kind to kind of to post these items on the group presentation discussion board for this week, really great. You also wanted me to mention, I think it was earlier in the presentation, kind of who pays for this, and you had the reference of ER physicians doing some charity care, and that's true, but the bulk of the expense is not the physician charge, it's the emergency room hospital charge. And that's really, the costs are borne by you and me, in higher, you know, cost to our insurance company or through federal subsidies and those sorts of things. So we end up all paying, but as a society we've decided that, you know, this is the law we want, that people should be able to be treated for emergencies. So excellent presentation. Any last minute questions or comments?
I actually did have a question. On this slide 2, it says that
Well, I didn't hear it. Oh, go ahead.
only hospitals that have entered into the provider agreement with with CMS are subject to EMTALA. Are there hospitals that aren't in agreement with CMS?
Sorry, my audio is going in and out. You want to type that question in the chat? Maybe it might be a little easier for me.
How do I get back to the chat screen? Hold on. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry. For some reason, the communication is not working. I think it's on my end, not your end. But those questions, I didn't really hear them. It was going in and out. If you wouldn't mind, you could post your slides in the group discussion board, and you can post the question there, and I can try to answer it that way. Or you can email it to me.
Okay, I'll do that.
Otherwise, I don't want to frustrate you guys anymore with this poor connection. My apologies. But excellent work, excellent presentation. So thank you so much.
Good deal. It's not the absolute top, tip top.